So, good evening, everybody. This is the first time that I give the introduction. After 12 years of Richard coming to Munich, it's the 12th year now. And welcome, Richard.
Thank you.
We have a slightly different program this evening, and it's the first part of this kind of talk is about the book Confessions of a Seeker. That is Richard's latest book. You wrote that, you have just finished it, huh?
Yeah, less than a year ago it came out, yeah.
And also for me, this is the first time that I experience him as a seeker, because as long as I know you, you haven't been a seeker at all. So this is before the non-duality came in for you. Mm-hmm. And in that way, I also find it interesting that Richard has told his story very humorously and kind of sharp in a way, looking at the whole spiritual scene, actually worldwide, because he was traveling around to Nepal, India, and England, of course, tried all kinds of things from Buddhism, TM meditation, macrobiotic, hippies, drugs. What?
Like you.
Yeah, like me, yes, of course. But
his story as well.
So in that way, it's a very funny part, sometimes funny, sometimes critical, and I would like to also always see this on the background of non-duality, because it's clear that you don't promote spiritual growth with this book.
Mm-hmm. That is clear.
Yeah. So it is not that here anything of what is written here is meant to be taken seriously, is it?
Seriously? Well, there's some quite critical things in there about certain philosophies and religions and so forth. Maybe we could take that seriously if we wanted to.
Yeah.
But no, it's not promoting anything. Definitely not.
No, you are not saying spiritual growth is the truth. In this book.
No.
On the contrary, there's always some kind of Richard also says that he himself is a skeptic. Skeptical.
If you want to sum
skeptical,
the point of view,
yeah.
I mean, that book covers a huge chunk of my life, at least 30 years, really, actually more. And if I was going to sum it up in a phrase, what my point of view, I would say, I hope I'm an open-minded skeptic. I'm definitely skeptical. I hope I'm open-minded. Yeah.
And what was the first impulse that made you look for something deeper? Can you remember?
Very, very easily. Unhappiness, as it is for many people who set out on a seeker's path, whatever that means. Yeah, unhappiness with life. And dissatisfaction.
Was that in your teenage years or later? When did that really become clear?
It didn't become, it didn't turn into something which could be described as a spiritual search until my late 20s. So before that, I sort of coped with my dissatisfaction with life and my unhappiness in more, the more usual ways, drinking beer, taking drugs, hanging out with friends, that sort of thing. So, but in my late 20s, I suppose, I had a major acid trip, which kind of blew apart my conceptions of what reality was. And that was probably, it's difficult to assign cause and effect, but that was probably the first step. And then I dabbled with some meditation techniques on my own after that, didn't get anywhere, and went off to do TM. And the TM initiation was almost as big a revelation as the acid trip had been. So that was it. After that, I was just hooked, I was gone. And forget about the next 30 years, really.
I was surprised when you described the TM experience. I also was initiated also with this mantra. Nothing happened for me. So can you describe that a little bit more? What really happened there? Is that in some way comparable to the not being there?
No, I would say not. Maybe some people would disagree. I would just say anyone who has experienced transcendence at all, it was just a profound and very deep transcendence, but then add to that the fact that this is the first experience of this. I can't remember how old I was by then, maybe 30 roughly, and this is the first experience of transcendence ever in my life. And it was that transcendence, just the chatter in the mind just switched off for quite a while, and that was the first time in my life since I'd been old enough to be conscious that the chatter in my mind had switched off while I was away. So it was quite an experience, and I can remember it was sort of slightly trippy, because I can remember leaving the centre on a Sunday afternoon, having been initiated, and it's like the buses, the red London buses going past, like, wow, the red of them, it's like, as if I'd taken acid. So it was quite profound. And I mean, I'm no expert on this at all, but I believe this is relatively common with first experiences of TM, maybe other meditation techniques as well. But I don't think it's that uncommon. I mean, some people, it's like it does nothing for them. Other people can have this really profound experience straight away, which of course is then, it's a huge hook. It's like, wow, I want more of this. So I kept going, I became very passionate.
Yeah, and would you say it has something to do with this mantra?
I'd have to say that in the kind of normal world of cause and effect, because there I go in innocently to the centre. I've given them a huge sum of money, and I think a bag of fruit and a bunch of flowers. I'm feeling very sceptical. They give me this mantra, they whisper it in my ear, I start repeating it, thinking, God, this is going to be boring, and then straight down into this totally new state of down or up, I'm not sure which, or out, anyway, into this totally new state of transcendence, yeah.
So it's not just that the mind stops or is quieter, there's something really totally different. There's a
for me,
new
it's
dimension.
totally different, and that's, I would say that was this huge hook, which then kept me going for the next 30 years, yeah.
And also interesting is, that is maybe just historically interesting, that from there you went to this Indian Guru Raj.
Guru Raj, your only memory.
And obviously a lot of the TM people, especially those in the higher ranks, went also there.
Yeah.
And can you explain what happened? What is the connection there?
Yes, this Guru Rajananda Yogi, who I followed passionately for about 3 years, he came out of nowhere, and his organisation grew enormously very quickly. And what happened was that he had somehow attracted to him a woman who was very high up in the TM movement, and then through her, a man who was also very high up in the TM movement, so they became his followers. But this was at exactly the same time that Maharishi, who'd always decried siddhis, he'd always said, don't bother with siddhis, they're a waste of time, he started running siddhi courses. And so, of course, we were very pure and very holy, and we thought, well, we don't want to learn siddhis. So a lot of people left TM at that time, including a lot of the teachers. They became, very dissatisfied. So this organisation, Guru Raj's, went from nothing to really quite large very quickly in several different countries. So suddenly, out of nowhere, he had an organisation in America, Australia, Britain, several other European countries as well. Yeah.
So the guy must have had something to...
Oh, God, yes.
Some kind of energy or...
Lovely, limpid, eyes, dark eyes, into which one could melt as if into pools of light. Oh yes, extremely powerful meditation techniques, and a kind of wider appeal than TM, because he taught us. We learned 3 different individual meditation techniques, and then of course we had retreats and groups and so forth, and he had this weird chant that we did, which is completely unlike any chant I've ever come across anywhere else, which might just be my ignorance, I don't know. And we do this chant for maybe 20 minutes, half an hour, and then we meditate while somebody struck this enormous Tibetan gong, and it just took us to places that, other beers could not reach. Yeah, so I mean, TM was powerful, but Guru Raj's techniques were like supercharged. Yeah, that was lovely for about 3 years. Do you want to know what happened?
Afterwards,
well, it all, as these things do sometimes, very rarely, of course, it just fell apart in this huge explosion of scandal.
Because of sex.
Well, sex was the reason it became public. It turned out that he had taken as lovers 3 different women high up in his organisation. I'm not going to tell you the whole story, because it's a wonderful story, and obviously I want you to buy the book. But he'd basically taken 3 women as lovers, all high up in his organisation. None of them knew about the other 2. A little bit dodgy. Of course, obviously, eventually somebody gossiped or boasted or something like that, and they each found out that they were not unique. And so there was a huge explosion of rage. But it then turned out, of course, that he'd also been up to all sorts of other things, as gurus quite often get up to. But the hierarchy had been keeping it all secret, for the higher good, for the good of our spiritual growth and so forth. But when the sex scandal hit the headlines, and these 3 women sort of went into a state of justified rage maybe, then all the other scandal came out as well. And by then I was a teacher for him. I've been teaching meditation for him for about 2 or 3 years. And all the teachers were summoned to a big meeting in London, and we sat there in shocked horror as all of these revelations were revealed to us, about alcohol, money, sex, almost everything you could imagine.
And how did you feel? I mean, it was not like...
I feel? Horrified. It was terrible. It was awful. You have to think back to the time. This was in the late 70s. So you have to understand that this was not just a guru, this was the avatar of the New Age that we had here, you see. And obviously there were other groups who also had the one and only avatar of the New Age, but we knew that we had the real one, all the others were fake. And we're sitting there and all of this scandal is being revealed to us. It's just awful, it's just terrible. Really, it was very, very traumatic. Yeah, and a huge learning experience. Yeah.
So never again after that. Well,
not with a guru. No, I tried. I had hung around loosely. I mean, you could say. I hadn't exactly been unfaithful to Guru Raj, but I had hung around slightly with Muktananda, Baba Muktananda, who was the guru of the Siddha Yoga movement. So I tried. I thought, I'll try now to see if I can fall in love with Muktananda in the way that I fell in love with Guru Raj, but no, nothing. I went to 3 Siddha Yoga ashrams actually. Just didn't feel anything. So that was it for gurus. It's over. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Although you had also something to do with the Buddhism in different ways.
Oh God, yes, in different ways.
There was this Tibetan Lama, Sogyal Rinpoche, that you met.
Yeah, very early on when nobody knew about him. Yeah.
He was a kind of little bit enjoying too much beer and women and
Well, I think it might have been martinis rather than beer, I'm not sure, and we didn't know about the women at that point. This was very early on when he was very young, he'd only just arrived here. And I did this course with him on Buddhist meditation with about 12 other people, and of course later on he became hugely famous. He wrote that book, the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying, set up a huge ashram, I think in France, set up this organisation, Ripa, which became very large, and then of course all the scandal began to come out about him as well.
He was also in this famous film, Little Buddha, or Living Buddha? No, Little Buddha, by Bertolucci.
Was that anything to do with him?
Yeah, he was one of the characters.
Oh, right, okay.
He was the one who chose the little children there.
Oh, right, okay.
So he was already very famous.
Yeah, hugely famous, and of course now, like so many others, sort of brought down by scandal. Yeah. So there were several. I kind of flirted with Buddhism. I mean, I was still a very serious seeker, so I kept flirting. I thought, right, I'll become a Buddhist. That's easy. It's not easy. I don't know if any of you have tried to become a Buddhist. But, well, it wasn't easy for me. I mean, I tried quite hard. I was quite sincere. It would not take. I could not become a Buddhist. And I had a friend who was a Buddhist teacher who offered to take me to, this was Rigpa, Sogyal Rinpoche's organisation. She actually offered to drive me to Oxford so I could take refuge in the Sangha. And something in me just couldn't do it. I just couldn't become a Buddhist. I tried with about 5 different Buddhist groups. It just got worse and worse. Each Buddhist group I went to, it just got worse.
But if you look at the teaching, that the essential teaching, it seems to me that if there's anything similar to what you would say in non-dualistic
Absolutely.
talk, there is, in Buddhism it is said that there is no I.
Absolutely.
So in that way there's a connection.
Yeah, definitely, and the central teaching's great. I've got absolutely no problems with the central teaching. In fact, I have no problems with Buddhism whatsoever, except it turns out I can't be a Buddhist. I mean, I can't tell you why, I just can't. It's a bit like, I don't know, it's a bit like going to the latest film all your friends love and you don't like it. You can't help it. It's just, your friends get very disappointed.
I want to read a little quote,
Okay.
and want you to ask you what you can say about this. I found that quite. You said, you write here, up to this point I have lived by Socrates' dictum, the unexamined life is not worth living.
Yeah.
Now I'm beginning to wonder whether the too much examined life may not be worth living either.
Yeah, and I stand by that. Yeah, I started wondering that probably about 30 years ago, and I still stand by it, yeah. I think there is a kind of balance, I think, I'm not sure, to be honest, I'm not sure whether Socrates is right that the unexamined life is not worth living, because I have not tried to live it. So the unexamined life might turn out to be wonderful, if I'd spent my life, I don't know, drinking beer and going to football matches, that might have been great. So I'm not going to comment on that. But I do think, there is a point, it's a bit like there comes a point maybe in therapy. Therapy can be great up to a point, and then maybe there can be too much therapy. And I think the same with seeking, it can be great up to a point, you get a lot from it, a lot of entertainment apart from anything else, and then perhaps it can just become neurotic, maybe, for some people.
Well, you certainly did the other side here quite a lot, no? This examining of...
I did examine. Yes, I cannot, whatever I can be accused of, I cannot be accused of living the unexamined life. I did examine my life a lot, and some people would say too much. Yeah.
That can sometimes be the end of the seeking, if you really can't go on anymore, or...
Yeah.
But it was not like
no,
that.
I kept going.
You also have some philosophical parts in this book here. some serious questions.
Absolutely, yeah. But yeah, I like to think that it's both a very humorous and an extremely serious book. Yeah.
There's one which I find very interesting is the headline already. Matter thinks. Doesn't matter.
How can matter think?
Yeah. What is consciousness?
Yeah.
That is certainly one of the main questions in not only philosophy, it's also scientists.
Yeah.
The brain, is the brain producing consciousness, or what is consciousness? Can you say something about that?
Well, firstly, I would say there are several chapters in there which could be considered to be philosophical, but the two key philosophical questions that it addresses is really the nature of consciousness. Can consciousness be explained by physical reality? And the other is free will. Mm-hmm. And the reason I think that I've included those is because it seems to me that both those questions bear quite centrally on a lot of the other material in the book, on the material about seeking. So I felt like they were worth considering. And now, what was your question? Was it, could I
just if you can say something about the problem that is involved, or is part of this question. What is consciousness?
The problem, which it seems to me a lot of physicists, psychologists and so forth acknowledge, and a lot of others don't. So there's a huge controversy over this. It is quite clear from the book that I'm very much on one side of this controversy and not the other. But the problem, which is actually called the hard problem by a lot of physicists, so even physicists think this is a very difficult problem, and a lot of physicists think it is a problem that will never be solved, and I agree with those, is that we have this material stuff. Okay, we understand this material stuff wonderfully now. I mean, we even understand it down to the atomic level, the subatomic level, and so forth, but it's still kind of material stuff. How does it produce consciousness? I mean, put it another way, we know that there is in the skull this thing, this object, called the brain, and that brain obviously is intimately connected with thinking. How does that happen? I mean, if you take a brain out of a skull and lay it on a lab and look at it, or even if you keep it somehow hooked up so it's still alive, there is absolutely nothing about its physical structure that suggests that it would somehow be able to create consciousness. So the basic idea is really that this is an imponderable question, that it can, whatever else can be explained, this will always remain. This is my contention and the contention of some other physicists, neuroscientists, psychologists, but not all, that no matter what exploration we do, the nature of consciousness and its connection to physical matter cannot be explained.
Is it consciousness the same as subjectivity, or the subject as such?
In a way, I don't want to go there too much, because the trouble is, once we start asking what consciousness is, this could eat up the rest of the evening, and it would be quite boring as well. So I prefer to keep it simple and say that what I mean by consciousness, and what I believe a lot of physicists, neuroscientists, psychologists mean also by consciousness, is simply experience. So we don't need to argue about it philosophically. We can just say that it lies in the realm of what I often call the bleeding obvious, that there is experience. There's nothing about physical matter that we know of that explains why there should be experience. Mm-hmm. That's it, to put it in a nutshell. Mm-hmm. And I know there's a lot of physicists and psychologists and philosophers out there who disagree with this. So it's like there's a little philosophical war going on at the moment between these two sides, and I'm very much on one side of that. I mean, if you want to investigate the other side, the obvious philosopher to go to is Daniel Dennett, who very much says there is no problem, what are you talking about? It's all been explained.
I just have to think that what Tony often says recently, there is no consciousness.
Yeah, sure.
That is also what kind of hit me,
Yeah.
because my whole career was about what is consciousness, the question, as a challenge philosophically,
Yeah.
and then Tony comes along and says, well, it's
Yeah.
bullshit, consciousness,
Absolutely,
there's no
yeah.
consciousness.
I use the word consciousness because I don't think it's possible to have this discussion about philosophy, neuroscience, psychology without using a word like that. But, of course, actually all we're talking about is the fact that there is experience. You know, we don't have to add on to that the idea of consciousness, but I'm just trying to deal with this subject in the way that it's normally sort of discussed and referred to by the philosophers and the neuroscientists. Yeah.
So maybe soon I will say, please read something
Right.
that you would like to read,
Okay.
and then maybe everyone can ask questions to this
Yeah.
about the book,
Or about anything.
and then we have a little break,
Yeah.
like maybe 10 minutes, and then if that is okay with you, we just have an open evening, like as
Yeah.
non-duality.
Bearing in mind that usually we talk about non-duality. And
Is that
would be-
okay for you too? Or would you like me to ask more questions about the book?
Sounds good what you said.
Should we go for it then? No one's saying anything else, so should we go for
Yeah.
it?
Yeah.
If you've got the, we'll see, I've got two passages, I'm not sure why they've come to me, because the book covers such a huge ground, it's difficult to get a feeling for it just from one or two extracts, but a couple of extracts have come to me, and I'll try one of them, and then if you've got the patience for the other one, I will. It's not going to be the one you want, I'm sorry.
No, that's totally fine. I mean, just want to mention that
Yeah,
there's also past life experiences in the book, and all of what you can think. Everything is there in the book.
Christian homed in on the fact that there is an account in this book of I'm going to do the air quotations when I say past life experience, right? There's no suggestion of either belief or disbelief in this. As I said, I'm an open-minded skeptic, but nevertheless the experience was a past life therapy. And there's a description in there where, in a past life, it turned out that I was a pilot in the Luftwaffe during the war. So Christian tried to persuade me to read that out, but unfortunately that's third on my list, so we're not going to get to it.
But I hope you are not sad when I leave this and go over there.
I'll overcome it. I'll
Yeah.
overcome myself. I will be sad.
Thank you very much.
It's okay, well, thank you for the questions. That was fun, yeah. So, I had a kind of, for many years I have had a kind of subsidiary life in Wales, with friends in Wales, which is an area of Britain, whether you know this or not, which is very much a centre of hippies and all sorts of things that we get up to, and lots of very weird beliefs, strange beliefs. So this is probably the longest paragraph in the book. I may try to cut it down. It's just a description. I've just set the scene. I'm standing in a kitchen in Wales in a friend's flat, and I've been having an argument with another friend's 18-year-old daughter. Right, and this girl looks absolutely terrifying. You know, she's got tattoos and dreadlocks, and she's got bits of metal sticking out of her face all over. And we just had an argument about whether people in London or Wales are the maddest, because I'm claiming that the people I know in Wales are quite a lot madder than the people in London, and she really doesn't like this. So I just said, you know, we end up agreeing to disagree, and she makes me a cup of tea. So it's all right in the end, you know, we don't come to blows. But this is then my justification for why I think the people in Wales are that much madder. I don't know if I'll get to the end of this very long paragraph, but I'll give it a go. Oh, by the way, if I do, there's a reference in here to something called home education. I don't know if you have this here in Germany. Parents have the right in Britain to keep their children out of school, not send them to school, and educate them at home. Yeah, can you do that here?
No.
No. oh, you'd probably be putting, no, well, we can do it in Britain, and it's called home education when a parent does that, so that's the reference if we ever get there. So she's just made me this cup of tea. The kitchen in which we are standing belongs to a friend who seriously believes that the world is ruled by David Icke's shape-shifting, 12-foot-high, bejeweled lizards. Perhaps you do too, but if that is the case, you really should not be reading this book. His ex-partner drives from her home to a nearby village every few days to collect water from a spring in a huge plastic container, having been convinced that drinking tap water will imperil her health and may shorten her life. Unsurprisingly, the woman who has convinced her of this has also sold her an expensive water filtration system. Presumably, this is so that she does not become seriously ill or die from the bugs which might have contaminated the spring water, for the fact is that sheep piss nearby. Yet most of us drink tap water, and our longevity continues to climb remorselessly upwards. Her next-door neighbour channels angelic healing forces, and a friend across the road is the mouthpiece for a spirit guide who dispenses cosmic wisdom every Thursday evening. Just up the street lives a lady who regularly goes on a detox diet of such savagery that it deserves to be classified as an eating disorder. If you greet her with a hug, you find yourself holding bones. The man a few houses along from her meditates for up to 8 hours a day. If he meets you in the village, he may grunt and nod, but he will not join in any conversation lest it distract him from his spiritual path. Many of the local parents go in for home education, which, as one of my friends caustically asserts, down here should really be called no education. The parents keep their children away from school and instead gather with them regularly at coastal coffee bars. There they ignore the children, who are left for hours on end to reenact Lord of the Flies on the beach. One of these parents is receiving help from an entire healthcare team, including psychotherapists and social workers. She seems to have made it her mission in life to seduce each of these in turn. In this, she has so far been remarkably successful. So that's just a little taste of my hippie friends in Wales. Have you got the patience for one more?
Yeah.
Yeah? Is anybody easily upset by attacks on religions here? Well, we'll go for it anyway. This is the very last section in the book, and one of the reasons it's the last is because it's one of my favourites, right? So this is a real incident, truly happened to me and a couple of friends. It's a very minor incident, but I think it's just very indicative of something. Probably happened about 2 years ago now. I do Tai Chi, by the way, I should say. So me and my two friends, we've just come from a Tai Chi class. We always go for a coffee afterwards at this particular cafe. It's called Trendy Vicar. I am sitting in a cafe with two friends after a Tai Chi class. It is a very good cafe, so we come here regularly. As usual, it is full of young mothers with toddlers, lycra-clad cyclists, and a few businessmen working on their laptops or holding discreet meetings. Mashed avocado, sourdough bread, and healthy smoothies feature prominently on the menu. Today, sitting opposite us is a vicar. He is a trendy, modern vicar. He has a shaved head and he is planning his church business with an associate on his iPad. He is the very same vicar who has banned our Tai Chi group from using his church hall. I do not want to engage him in conversation. I prefer to enjoy my latte. But as he gets up to leave, my friend Simon, asks him, "Why won't you let us use your hall for our Tai Chi classes?" The vicar patiently explains. "Many people," he says, "believe that Tai Chi is simply an innocent form of exercise, but it's not. It's a Taoist practice. Taoism is a non-Christian religion which is trying to make converts in this country. As a Christian, I believe that if I let you use God's premises for your Tai Chi classes, he'll be angry with me. Then, when I die, I'll have to explain myself to him." To show that there are no hard feelings, he shakes hands with each of us as he leaves. At this point, I cannot help being drawn in. I grip his hand tightly so that he cannot easily withdraw it, look into his eyes, and I say, "The problem you have is that you don't really know what kind of a God you're going to meet when you die. God might turn out to be a Taoist. Then he might be angry with you because you didn't let our Tai Chi group use your church hall." He does not say anything to this. He looks momentarily confused. Then I let his hand go. I want to add, "Do you realise how psychotic you sound to ordinary people like us?" I want to add it, but I do not. There's a few other... One of the things that strikes me, and one of the reasons I like that passage, and there are a few other passages in there. I mean, there is a lot about religion in the book, actually. And it's something to do with our conditioning, that because we kind of so conditioned, quite often it's social situations like that, but also on radio interviews and on television and so forth, I hear people saying what, in a way, are the most outrageous things, but nobody notices because we're so conditioned. You know, that we just kind of accept it. It's like we've gone deaf to kind of how bizarre and how mad some of the things that are said in the name of religion are. And actually, as I'm saying that, have you got the pages? Well, one very short because it's just another example of this, and it's from the same chapter. It's extremely short. It's just another example. I'm just listening to the radio very innocently one day, and I hear somebody say the most outrageous thing, and it's on a panel, and nobody says anything, nobody questions it, nobody objects, because it's just one of the kind of things we're so used to hearing. So this is called the resurrection of the flesh. It's about the fact that God is going to resurrect us at the end of days from our graves, which is a moment I hope you're all looking forward to as much as I am. But when you hear the justification for it, this dogma in this passage, you might change your minds about this. So this is called the resurrection of the flesh. During a discussion of faith on BBC Radio, a representative of one of the Abrahamic religions patiently explains why we must be physically resurrected from our graves. It is so that God can judge us, and, if we are not worthy of salvation, cast us into hell to be tortured for all eternity. It is necessary for us to have a physical body, as otherwise we could not experience this torment. Not one of the other panellists, who all sound like quite reasonable 21st century men and women, thinks it worth commenting on this poisonous belief, nor on the nature of such a monstrously evil deity. No one states that this opinion sounds psychopathic or possibly psychotic. Everyone lets it pass, I suppose, in a spirit of interfaith tolerance, as if the religious scholar had said nothing more remarkable than the weather's looking good for tomorrow. There you go. End of extracts. I do find that one of the astonishing things about the conditioned world where religions are concerned. You know, that it's like we go deaf to these outrageous statements. I mean, there's another little section in the book, which I won't read to you, about, you know, there was a big hurricane, a huge hurricane in Florida, and of course within minutes, churchmen are saying this is God's wrath visited on America because we tolerate homosexuality. It's like, what? I mean, this is kind of, I mean, this is psychotic. I don't think psychotic is an unkind word to say. You know, it's like, well, I can see why hurricanes might be God's wrath visited on humanity because of global warming. You know, that kind of makes sense. But anyway, you know, I'll leave the point there. I think I've made the point, hopefully. So, okay, what are we going to do next? Are we going to take a break?
Well,
Or
maybe some people want to ask something about the topics that we...
Okay.
Like, for example, I would add that this Christian religion is really absolutely mad. If you look at the content, what is the idea behind it? And yeah, we are so used over almost 2,000 years to believe in this or to think this is okay, that's the religion. But how there can be one Son of God and the rest is what? I mean, that's one thing. Then the whole thing with the resurrection.
it makes no sense on any level. It's astonishing. And one of the astonishing things I sort of find is because, you know, the New Testament is, you know, supposed to be so much kinder than the Old Testament because the New Testament brings in love. And actually, the story in the New Testament is like 10 or 20 times crazier than the story in the Old. I mean, the Old Testament is kind of makes sense. You've got this tribal God who is very, very bad-tempered and angry, and that's how he behaves. So, yeah, everybody can relate to that. Everybody who's known anyone with an angry father can relate to that. But the New Testament story, I mean, it is just bizarre beyond belief. It doesn't make sense on any level. You know, there's this God who is all-knowing and all-powerful and all-loving, but will then torture us for all eternity if we fail this one very, very bizarre test that he sets for us. You know, we need salvation to save us from sins which he knew we were going to commit because he's omniscient, and which presumably he deliberately created us to commit because he's also omnipotent. I mean, I'm not going to go on. It's just kind of mad. And yet, for 2,000 years, it holds more or less complete sway over the Western world. What? Is that kind of what you're getting at?
Yeah, and also, I mean, what we as seekers, when we follow the guru, for example, for me it was Osho, the church would point out and say, look at these stupid idiots, they have a guru and adore the guru, and yeah, what is Jesus? I mean, that's even more weird. The guy is not even there, and it is considered to be the only one. So all these things, and it's the powerful positions that these people still have and hold in society, and this is crazy.
One of the things I find both, you know, very amusing but also absolutely horrifying is when you hear, for example, Catholic priests, bishops and cardinals denouncing cults, denouncing guru cults. Mike, what do you think the Catholic Church is?
Exactly.
You know? One of the most successful cults the world has ever seen. Also one of the most, you know, successful totalitarian organisations that the world has ever seen.
Yeah.
You know.
So
And I'm not even going to go near the topic of, you know, abuse and so forth. It's just too big. I mean, and what can you do other than weep? That's it. Yeah.
I was going to ask you, what was your impetus to, or the drive to write this book? What was behind that?
Well, I had no intention of doing it whatsoever. You know, I really, you know, I'd written 4 books on non-duality. I didn't want to go anywhere near what I'm... It isn't an autobiography, but there's a lot of autobiographical material in it. And then, getting on over 4, under 5 years ago, I got into a new relationship. Mm-hmm. And I think, as often happens, you know, we started telling stories of our past, and at one point, you know, Dawn, who's very valiantly sitting there behind the camera filming this at the moment, said to me, "You should write this down, you know, this is interesting." I said, no. She said, "Well, yeah, go on." So I just tried, a little bit, just took one anecdote and sat in a coffee bar, which I love doing anyway, and just wrote it down, and then, you know, next time I saw Dawn, I read it to her and said, "Yeah, that's good, you know, go on with that." So I just did, and that, you know, eventually there was a book. That's all I can say, you know, and also I would say in a way it did write itself. You know, it was a sort of very easy, I mean, I'm extremely lazy, you know, I've got to that age where I don't have to work, so I'm certainly not going to do anything that I don't have to do, but it's very taxing. But it's just very easy to do it. Yeah. Is there anything else on this before we
I just
move
want
on?
to make a remark. I've read this book 2 times and I enjoyed it very much.
There you go. I'm going to hold it up to the camera on that one. Okay, there's the little advertisement, available on Amazon, and also, if you want an autograph copy, available in the hall back there as well. Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah.
I was just wondering if you have any spiritual experiences now, recent times?
Yeah, I'm always a bit cautious with that phrase, spiritual experience, possibly for fairly obvious reasons, and maybe like a lot of people who've been trained psychologically and psychotherapeutically, I prefer, you might think I'm nitpicking, but I prefer the word transpersonal. And the reason that you tend to read about transpersonal psychology rather than spiritual psychology, because it sounds more respectable. They actually mean exactly the same thing, transpersonal and spiritual, but anyway. So having cleared that up, I would say, I mean, I've obviously had quite a lot of transpersonal experiences that have gone into the book, and more recently I've had I have had and still ongoing sort of what would normally be considered Kundalini experiences and so forth. Yeah, to which I would be reluctant to assign any significance whatsoever. Yeah, I would just say, okay, yeah, these are experiences. This may be why I resist the word spiritual, because I think as soon as we use the word spiritual, it's like there's such a weight. That word is carrying such a weight that it's something incredibly special. And I think, so I resist that word. You know, I would say transpersonal experiences are just experiences on a certain kind of level, just like, you know, there are physical experiences, emotional experiences, psychological experiences, transpersonal experiences. So I wouldn't necessarily assign any great significance to that. But yeah, to some extent that's ongoing, yeah.
You say, or you write something like, it seems that gurus fear psychotherapists.
Yeah,
Why?
not quite that. Yeah, I don't think it's that they fear them, it's just they don't want their disciples, their devotees to go to them. I don't think that's any more mysterious than saying, you know, an electrician fears other electricians. They don't want their clients to go to other electricians. It's just, you know.
It's like a competition almost.
There's competition. I think there's a bit more, but I'm being a bit simplistic there. There's a bit more with the guru psychotherapist thing, I think, because, you know, we start going to psychotherapists, it's quite possible that all sorts of pennies might start dropping, as we say. Do you have that phrase also in German?
My start
Pennies dropping. It's like suddenly you get a breakthrough in your ideas and your thinking. And I think maybe that's it, you know. I mean, that famous thing, isn't it? Osho, you know, leave your shoes and your mind at the door. Yeah. Now, I can see very good reasons for leaving your mind at the door. I'm not cynical necessarily about that instruction, but nevertheless we could be cynical or sceptical about it. That the guru in a way does gain an advantage if we don't think too clearly, particularly about the unending queue of attractive young women who are going through his sleeping quarters. And I think, you know, one of the problems of people going to psychotherapists is that, you know, we can wake up to seeing the world in all sorts of new ways. And that can be a threat to everything that we've been doing up to then. So if we've been a devotee of the guru up to that point, going to a psychotherapist could be a threat to that, in the same way that it might be a threat to our marital relationships. Does that kind of make sense?
Mm.
So I think it's a little bit more than just not wanting a rival.
Mm.
Yeah. And of course lots of people go to both gurus and psychotherapists and there's no problem at all. That can also happen. Yeah.
And psychotherapists could become a guru.
Yeah, sometimes do. It's like can a psychotherapist or a guru or both. Same for you. I mean, Jung, Freud, R.D. Lang. They all have kind of something of the guru about them. Yeah. Yeah.
So, Richard, where does sort of the book, the stories, sort of fit in with the talks you give and
Yeah.
the content and whatever's coming through? Is the book and the stories in there and the experiences or whatever just part of what is? That's how you would say that,
Absolutely.
and whether you played with music and you would sit there and play a violin for us, you read from your book and tell us these stories and you're... Okay.
It's just what's happening from
It's
that
just
point of
what's
view. I mean, I've
happening.
deliberately not gone there very, well, not really at all. I mean, I do mention the fact that I give talks on non-duality there, partly, you know, there is a bit of a section about all the audience members I most remember for having attacked me over the years, so I put that in, but really I've kind of kept it out, partly because, I mean, I've written 4 books about non-duality. If anybody wants to know about those, please buy them and read them, of course, but partly because this is deliberately I mean, some of it is philosophical and you can tie it up. The stuff about free will, you can tie up beautifully with non-duality, of course, but most of this is quite, I mean, the normal way of looking at it would be, well, most of this is clearly biographical. So my way of looking at it would be, well, it's story.
Yeah.
It's a collection of stories which apparently happened to an apparent person in an apparent past. Yeah. Yeah.
Where you also reflect on memory. From in the beginning already you say, well,
Yeah.
I don't know what really memory means here. We are more creating this, what we call memory. It's almost like a creation in the moment.
I have to say, when I wrote that, I think that's a very important point, but when I wrote it, I wasn't in any way particularly thinking about that from what could be called the non-dual perspective. I was just making what I think is a perfectly obvious point from the psychological point of view as to how memory works. And probably the easiest way to sum up how memory works for the layman is it doesn't work very well. Basically. So it's worth making that point because this claims to be a book of memories and it has to be understood that my memory is as faulty as anybody else's. If nobody is supposed to recognise themselves in this book, but if they do and they object to what I've written.
Which happened.
I'm hoping that this is my get out of jail free card, that memory is very faulty. However, I have to confess this has already happened once. I have had an extremely angry Buddhist on my case who should never have, I don't even know how, I'm going to use the plural pronoun to conceal their gender. I don't know how they knew about it. There's not, they shouldn't have known about it. I mean, I'm talking about somebody I knew many, many years ago. I don't know whether they've been secretly following my career, but they did find out about it, specifically the bit about themselves, and they are very, very angry with me about it. Yeah, and there's a few other characters in that book I hope never find out about it. But what can you, I mean, this is the danger if you start writing about reality. This is the danger. What do? When push comes to shove, you either kind of wimp out and you leave it out, or you put it in there and risk offending someone. But, I think this is a case of art trumps life. I'm certainly not the first writer to have lost a friend or an acquaintance who's recognised themselves in a work of literature. Sorry, not that I'm claiming this is a work of literature, that would be a bit pompous of me.
So maybe we have a 5 minutes or 10 minutes break, and then start fresh again.
Okay,
And
let's do that.
in this time, maybe you can sign books or...
Yeah, absolutely. But only my own books. I'm not signing random books written by other people. Yeah, sure.
Here, sign this book.
Yes. I've got
What
a
is it? I don't
I've got
know.
a first edition of G.H. Lawrence here. Will you sign it for me? I'm not doing that. So what happens now?
Non-duality.
Do I have to say anything? Or?
If you like.
Oh. This is a little taster of the weekend. Maybe.
It's like a little introduction.
Little
to
introduction.
What will happen tomorrow and...
What will happen tomorrow?
No, I mean, no, not that way.
You're going to read the future for us.
Yeah. Well, shall I give a tiny little introduction to non-duality then? I know some of you have been here before and very familiar with it, but maybe I'll just assume there's some new people here and just talk a little bit like I will be talking tomorrow, probably at greater length, I expect. So, non-duality. I will sum it up in a phrase. I will sum it up in 4 words, actually. There is no self. Okay, that's non-duality. And now we can go home. There is no self is the heart of non-duality. I feel rather apologetic in a way, because I think anybody who sits in the front of a room and talks about non-duality should be apologetic as well, because we have chosen, funny phrase, we have decided, a strange phrase, to sit in the front of a room and talk about something that it's impossible to talk about. So on those grounds alone, everybody who talks about non-duality should start with an apology. We're going to talk about something which it is impossible to understand in words, and yet we're going to have a try. And those 4 words I started with seem as good a place to start as any. There is no self. We talk about... Okay, I'm going to stop saying, after every phrase that I use, I could say, that's a silly way to put it, but I'm going to stop saying that now, because it will be very annoying if I go on saying that. So we'll just take that as read. So, if the sentence, the phrase, seeing non-duality means anything, I would say that's the heart of it. But seeing non-duality is the seeing that there is no self. And seeing that there is no self is the seeing of non-duality. They're the same thing. So the suggestion from here, I mean, obviously, non-duality obviously is as a word, as an idea, as a concept, is opposed to duality. Okay, so we could say there's kind of two ways of seeing the world, or two assumptions about the world, and the normal assumption is that the world is dualistic, right? That we live in duality, and duality means two things. So my suggestion is that most of us, most of the time, just assume unquestioningly that we live in a world of duality. So that's two things. So we're entitled to ask, what are those two things? Because obviously there are far more than just two things in the world. That wouldn't make sense in a way. So the two things are that there is the world itself. I gave a talk, I think, what would it be, last Saturday, and I dread this. There was a real philosopher in the room, in the audience, which is very tough on me because I'm a kind of amateur, very amateur philosopher, so I'm kind of quite scared of real philosophers. And he started quoting Wittgenstein, which is even worse because obviously I don't really understand a word of Wittgenstein, but it did remind me of the only sentence of Wittgenstein's that I was going to say that everybody knows. This isn't true, but anybody who does know anything to quote from Wittgenstein, if it's only one thing they know, it will be this sentence. And the sentence is, very famous sentence, the world is everything that is the case. And that's brilliant. I mean, that is so brilliant that I think, Wittgenstein should be regarded as a non-dual speaker. Right? So one of these two things that exists in duality is the world. What is the world? The world is everything that is the case. Whatever is happening, whatever tables and chairs and arms waving about and happiness and talking and cars driving past, that's the world. So that's one thing in duality. The other thing is me, myself, feeling separate from all of that. So the normal mode of being in a dualistic sense is a sense that there is me as a separate entity, I could almost say object, is me as a separate entity, right? And I move through this second thing, this other thing called the world. So that's where we get duality from. And as I move through the world, which is separate from me, clearly this can in some ways be problematic because as I move through the world, I have to negotiate with it. And I have to negotiate objects, like I mustn't walk out in front of buses and so on. And that's fairly easy. But of course, the objects in the world which it is most difficult for me to negotiate with are those objects known as other people. So there's me, I am a person, and I am separate from this world through which I move, particularly including all the other people in it. And I'll just remind us that there are about, 6, 7, possibly 8 billion of those. So there are an awful lot of other people for me that I might have to negotiate with as well. So that's the state, I would say, in which most of us live. But I'm also going to suggest that that is not actually the experience or the state into which we're born as babies. In other words, in a rather obvious way, babies do not exist in this dualistic state. So the very young baby has no experience of, no concept of being in any way separate. So if you like, you could say there isn't a baby, or there isn't baby living in an environment, and that environment includes mother and father and maybe brothers. That doesn't exist for the baby. For the baby, there is just experience. There is just whatever's happening, and no sense of separation at all. The sense of separation emerges a little bit later on, probably as, we don't need to argue about precisely when, but as kind of thought, consciousness, self-consciousness begins to emerge, so then the sense of separation happens, and the child begins to think in terms of me and others, and this and that, and me and the environment in which I move, me and my toys, me and my mother, or whatever. So from quite an early age, almost all of us enter, we could say we're born into a non-dual state, if you like, and then we could say that at quite an early age, nearly all of us, not quite all of us maybe, but nearly all of us kind of naturally, as it were, our experience becomes dualistic, where it seems like there is me and there is everything else, right? So if we talk about seeing non-duality or non-dual seeing or the collapse of the sense of self or any of these phrases and other phrases like it that you may be familiar with and may have come across, that's what we're talking about. All we're talking about is the possibility that that sense that I am this separate entity moving through, and I'll call it an alien world, alien in the sense that it is separate, that sense can collapse. And that when it collapses, it can suddenly be realised, or it can suddenly be seen, or it can suddenly be apprehended. And it can be like a real aha. You know, that is a kind of illusion, it's a kind of appearance. The appearance, separation is a kind of appearance. It's not real. It seems real. It can seem like the most real thing in the room or the most real thing in the world, that separation. The sense that I exist as a separate person, but it's not real. And if it collapses, it can be an enormous shock to suddenly see, oh my goodness, that sense that I am an individual, a person, separate from everything else, that has been assumed automatically for maybe 20, 30, 40 or 50 years, is actually a kind of illusion, and there isn't actually any separation. So what we can say is if the sense of self collapses, then what also collapses is seeing that there's a this and a that there's a here and that there's a there. It's very, very difficult to try to describe or talk about this. But nevertheless, you know, I mean, here and there, for example, that whole, I don't know, it's both a concept and an experience. It relies totally on the sense that I have awareness, going back to these rather difficult words, tricky words we were talking about earlier, awareness and consciousness. I have awareness, or I am conscious, and that consciousness is somehow here. So there is a here, and then there's all these other places which I am separate from, and they're over there. So sometimes part of the description of the collapse of the sense of self that you'll hear, and you'll hear it from me and from other speakers and writers, is that this, you know, the sense of here and there collapses. It's just gone in that. Sometimes it can just be a split second of seeing, as we talk about. So in that split second of seeing, it's suddenly realised there's no here and there. How can that be? How can there be no here and there? Because if there's no locus or no place of awareness, if awareness is equally everywhere, then there isn't everywhere. Everywhere no longer exists. You know, here and there only makes sense because there's somehow a sense that there is my awareness here, which is different to the wall, which is over there. So that can just collapse. Sense of past and future can collapse. It can be very disorientating to have, you know, even a split second of this kind of seeing, what's usually called non-dual seeing. And all sorts of other things can collapse as well. And I'm thinking, if I go on much longer, what on earth will we have left to talk about tomorrow? We'll just have to sit here tomorrow and look at each other. But it might be obvious, maybe I'll mention a few things and maybe we'll talk about them more tomorrow, but it might kind of be, you know, be kind of obvious if there's no person. You know, there's quite a lot of really important stuff that only makes sense if we assume that there is a person. So if the person collapses, all that other stuff is also going to collapse as well. And I'll just maybe throw in one or two things here. I mean, just take, for example, well, we mentioned it earlier because I deal with it a little bit in my book, the idea of free will and choice. I mean, a person makes choices. A person has something called free will, maybe, through which they make choices, which makes them responsible for something called their life. Well, if the person collapses, it takes all that with it. No person, no free will, no choice, no responsibility, and nothing called my life. It's just life. So, free will gone, responsibility gone. Meaning, kind of gone, because meaning rather does depend on free will and choice. You look at all the stories of meaning that, the world has created, as it were. All the stories of meaning, which as Wittgenstein would say are the case, well, they not quite all, but they virtually all depend on concepts of free will and choice and self-responsibility. So all of that gone. This is why some people kind of back away from non-duality in horror. Absolute horror. No, I don't want to hear this, I can't take it. My sense of myself as a free agent who, with choice and, I've spent 30 years in Africa converting heathens to Christianity. Don't tell me that that was meaningless. Well, that's exactly what I'm saying. Yes, that was meaningless. Gloriously and beautifully meaningless. And in a way, how are we doing for time? Oh, all right. In a way, part of the kind of... I don't usually use this word. I have no idea why it's come into my head at the moment, but I'm going to use it as it has without censorship, and I might regret it in a minute. Part of the kind of ecstasy of seeing this, of seeing non-duality, is exactly that, is the collapse of all those stories of meaning and the realisation of the freedom of living without them. It's so free. And I don't often quote other writers and other speakers about Advaita and non-duality because I want you to listen to me and read my books, obviously. But I do often quote this one writer, and unfortunately I can't remember his name, and I really do apologise for that because I think it was a wonderful... It's so brief and it's just so wonderful, and it's just and the name's almost coming to me, and it's just there is something of the breath of freedom blowing through Advaita.
Yeah.
If there's one word that I would use to sum up non-duality, Advaita, whatever word we want to use, it would be that. It's freedom, but it's not freedom to do anything. It's freedom from, and it's freedom from all these stories of meaning and purpose that we tell each other in a desperate bid to try to somehow make that awful sense of separation feel okay. We were talking earlier about the nonsense of the Christian story. It's absolute nonsense. It makes no sense at all on any level, and yet it has gripped the West for, in the story of time, in the story of history, nearly 2,000 years. How can that be? Because we are desperate to have a meaning and purpose. Because it's so horrible feeling separate. And so, in a way, it doesn't matter whether it's the Christian story or whether it's Hanuman, the magic monkey, or whether it's Ganesh, the wish-fulfilling elephant, or whether it's Buddha mind, or whether it's, Zeus, or whatever. It doesn't matter, as long as we've got a story to hang on to give our lives meaning. Well, guess what? When it's discovered that we don't have a life, we don't need to give it meaning. Because everything without the person seeing it is then seen as so kind of spectacularly rich. Why would you need to add meaning to it? Yes.
Do you really think people really believe that?
What? Hanuman, the flying monkey god?
Or,
Yeah.
or Jesus and the Christians.
Yeah.
And all of, you
People
really
are
think so?
killing each other over it right now, probably. Yeah. Don't you?
No.
Well, maybe I'm naive. Really? You really don't believe all those mad...
Never did. No.
I need to be careful who I insult now, mightn't I? Because I may be a refugee fairly soon from my own country. No, really, you really believe all those kind of apparent... It's all a big game. They don't really believe this stuff. I wish. Yeah. No, I think when you're prepared to kill somebody because they have a slightly different concept of God to the one you have, you probably do believe it, yeah. I mean, not necessarily all the time. Often it's used as an excuse. I mean, I'm not kind of naive enough not to understand that, but no, I think so. I think quite a lot of the time, yeah. You think they're all just kind of cynics playing a bizarre game, do you?
Yes.
Yes.
It seems so. I can't imagine that anyone would believe these fairy tales.
Yeah. Have you not had the Jehovah's Witnesses come to your door?
Yeah, of course. It always seems like they're just joking or something.
It is kind of mind-boggling, isn't it? But yeah, people are prepared to die for these beliefs, yeah. Yeah.
Well, I have to say...
I like Hanuman, I mean really, I like Hanuman and Ganesh.
Yeah, they're kind of fun.
Yeah.
But what you say when you talk about the freedom of what you're saying is, I mean, that's basically it. That sort of draws, I don't know, for me anyway.
Yeah. People could get very, I mean, I'm sure you know, people could get very, very, very serious about Advaita and non-duality, and, you know, I don't think we've actually got real hot non-duality wars going on, but we've certainly got non-duality proxy wars going on as, you know, different speakers, you know, disagreeing passionately with each other and so forth. But for me, I just think part of the joy is the seeing it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Who cares? I mean, if only, particularly the conversion religions, I mean, they're the really dangerous ones. If only the conversion religions could just take the same attitude, who cares? Okay, you know, some of us believe that the transubstantiation of the blood and the wine is literal, and some of us believe that it's metaphorical. Well, who cares? But, oh no, we have to kill each other in our hundreds of thousands about it, you know. But I kind of hope, maybe I'm naive, and you know there are big arguments go on amongst advisors, but I kind of hope we don't take them too seriously, because you know anybody who really gets non-duality in even quite a slight way, surely there must be some glimmering of the thought that this really does not matter. It really doesn't, and it doesn't need to matter. You know. Okay, well, you know, we can have a holy crusade if we absolutely must, but couldn't we just go outside and look at the garden instead, and maybe have a cup of tea, because it really doesn't matter. But it doesn't matter which God we worship, because we made them all up anyway. Who cares?
I have a question regarding Jesus Christ. Don't you think that it's just a matter that an interpretation of the people of the Catholic Church of his message, that it's completely nonsense?
Yeah.
But the original message from Jesus Christ can be more or less the same as what you're saying?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my really honest answer to that, with no side to it whatsoever, is I have absolutely no idea. I don't know. I mean, clearly, I mean, surely it can't be what the Catholic Church says. That's too mad, surely. But maybe, I don't know.
Because it's been more or less my experience. Like I've been a skeptic like you all my life. Still, I was in a Catholic school,
Yeah.
and hearing all that stuff about Jesus Christ and all those things, and I didn't believe anything. And then to some point in year 2015, then I started to read about Eckhart Tolle,
Yeah.
and he somehow started to interpret what Jesus Christ was saying. Of course,
Yeah.
it was, of course, his interpretation. And then I just thought that it's kind of a pity that I just gave my back to Jesus Christ just because some people were telling me things about what he was saying,
Yeah.
which were completely nonsense. So I said, okay, it's nonsense, and I don't want to hear that anymore. But Eckhart Tolle showed me it might be that no one understood that message.
Yeah.
And then I tried to read things that I was told or taught in the school, and then from that perspective, it made a lot of sense.
Yeah. Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've read some of the Gnostic Gospels, and I've certainly read probably more about them than actually read the Gnostic Gospels myself, because they're a bit heavy going. And particularly, for example, people quote particularly the Gospel of Thomas. And there's certainly stuff in the Gnostic Gospels and in the Gospel of Thomas, which is absolutely, you could say, this has come straight out of, it could come straight out of a modern non-dual book. I mean, one of the things that's often quoted, I mean, I may be misquoting this, but it gets the point, you know, I am in the mustard seed, you know, if you cleave the wood in two, and I am there, you know, everywhere. And so forth. So I would say what you're saying, absolutely, it could be interpreted as a non-dual communication. I'm going to use that word. In terms, if I go directly to, you know, the specific question about, you know, Jesus, you know, I'm going to give the same answer as I gave before, but I'm going to add to it, and maybe I'm going a bit out on a limb here, but I'm saying, I don't know whether there was an original message coming from a historical person or not. I really have no idea. But I'm going to go further than that, and I'm going to say, and neither does anybody else. So we might as well speculate if we want to, and choose whatever interpretation we like, because it doesn't matter. So I have no idea if there was a historical Jesus. I have no idea if there was what he might have actually said, and nobody else does either.
Yeah. But somehow it makes it easier to hear from different people like you or some other guys, and see that they point to the same
Absolutely,
truth.
yeah.
And then if you feel that it points in the same direction, then you feel like, okay, we are all saying more or less the same.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's wonderful coming across this same, I'm going to say, communication from different cultures, different philosophical schools of thought, even different religious traditions. Yeah, absolutely. And I would say that what we're talking about here is the essential mystical communication. You know, that the only thing that mystics have to say or to talk to us about is the non-dual nature of reality. You know, and I wouldn't trust a mystic about anything else any more than trust them or don't trust them, but no more and no less than any other person. There's no reason a mystic should know anything about anything other than that. The one thing the mystic sees, the heart of the mystical communication, is there is no self. Yeah, and everything else flows from that. Yeah. And in a way, everything else that flows from that is then an interpretation. So it's not surprising then that you get different speakers and writers saying somewhat different things. Again, that's it doesn't matter.
And I understand more when I try to think about non-dualism. So I understand that everything at the end is just sensations and, like you say, like experience. But somehow it feels different. My hunger than seeing my pain, it feels somehow different as seeing just a tree. Yeah. So somehow our body and ourselves is giving some different kind of information to our brain that makes that. And how do you feel, or some people feel the same pain and seeing that tree? Or
I'm not quite sure what that last bit means.
I understand more or less, like, if you want to have this intuition or feeling that the self is not there. Somehow you have to have a feeling of everything as being the same.
Yeah. You see here, I mean, language does get very difficult, but I'm going to try and you see, I would say you can't have that feeling, you can't have that intuition. I'd say it's one of the reasons it's so difficult to talk about this is that it isn't a feeling. Therefore, it can't be related to anything that I, as a separate person, has ever experienced. And it's not an intuition. Therefore, it can't be related to any intuition that I have ever experienced. In fact, part of the shock of seeing this, because it is often a shock, is that it doesn't relate to anything that I have experienced in my past. Because by definition, everything that I have experienced in my past has been experienced in a apparent state of separation. And by definition, what we're talking about here is the disappearance of that, is the experiencing of everything by no one. Now, up to that point, everything has been experienced by someone. And then, maybe suddenly, it doesn't have to be suddenly, but maybe suddenly, everything is being experienced by no one. In other words, perhaps suddenly, everything is simply happening of its own accord, but not for anyone. Which is why it makes it so very difficult to talk about, because this cannot be related to any experience that I have ever had. Nevertheless, no matter how difficult it might be to talk about, just one split second of seeing, and it's like, oh my God, yes. That's what all these writers have been writing about. That's what all these speakers have been speaking about. Yeah?
It sounded funny to me to say, oh my God.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, but that's the conditioning, isn't it? That's lovely. I mean, yeah, oh my God, I've just been sitting here denying. Well, I've been denying the Creator God. Yeah. No, I'd say, yeah, it's a perfectly fine phrase for us expressing the astonishment that sometimes. You see, I have to stop there because I want to say the astonishment that sometimes experienced or felt. But it isn't experienced or felt, it's just astonishment arising in nothing of its own accord.
So there is no higher experience? Something like a higher experience?
No, unless you want there to be. I mean, if you want to take a chunk of experience and define it as higher, well, that's fine. Have that. But no, it's not. I mean, it's just what's happening. Everything that happens is equal in a way, yeah.
So is it meaningless?
Yeah.
Us gathering here?
Yeah, of course. Of course it is. Meaningless. Yeah, what meaning could it possibly have?
This is hard stuff. I mean.
Yeah, but before, just before we collapsed possibly into nihilism, I had a rather awkward person at my last talk in London, and he kept on telling me I was a nihilist. So I want to say, before we collapse into nihilism, I would say very strongly, I'm not a nihilist. Before we collapse into nihilism, I would say, yeah, of course it's meaningless, but that's because it doesn't need to have a meaning. Meaning is something that I'm going to use the term personal mind, meaning is something that the personal mind adds to life because life experienced in separation is not satisfying enough. It's too kind of empty and two-dimensional and kind of, oh no, oh another day, oh it's horrible. Oh, I know, I can convert heathens for God. That's my meaning in life. Now I feel okay. Right? So when the separated person that miserably adds meaning to their life in order to make it bearable has collapsed, it's no need for that anymore. Isn't it wonderful? Who needs meaning when they've got this wonderful chair here, or I might add this wonderful book here, So of course it's without meaning in that sense. Higher meaning. I mean, if you want a higher meaning, have it. There's no harm in it. Well, there may be, because it might cause you to kill people. But, there's no need for that. Higher meanings are invented by individuals who feel separate to try to make themselves feel better. Of course, most of us don't invent our own higher meaning because it's easier to buy one off the peg from the church down the road. Yeah. If you want imprisonment, have a higher meaning. That is real imprisonment.
Well, I think for me there's always this this I like what Tony, I remember he said that to me, the problem is that you don't exist, and looking me into the eyes, and this was sort of the shock of, well then what is this I?
Yeah.
But it's not something that you can do anything about. It's
Yeah.
either there or it isn't, sort
Yeah.
of thing. It's not my will to get rid of this I when it's there, and it's not my will. It's not about me.
Yeah.
So the whiff of, or the in the wind of freedom, or whatever that is, where nothing has meaning and this is freedom, I sense that. But
Yeah.
whenever the I is there, you get into your daily life again, and
Yeah.
things become important, small things. Constipation can become a huge
Yeah.
thing, you know?
Yeah.
Whatever.
Yeah.
The work, the this, the that.
Yeah, yeah, it's hell. It can be hell. I know. Yeah,
Yeah.
I know. And you know, the sort of the sense of the sense of futility and helplessness
Yeah.
of the one who sits at the front.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm asking myself.
But don't forget, you know, it's not that there's anybody sitting here saying there's nothing you can do about this. It's not that. That's a huge. You know, that's a world away, it's a cosmos away from, you know, not there's nothing you can do about this, there is no you.
Yeah.
There's you know, they're in different universes.
Absolutely.
I mean, there's nothing you can do about this, is a bit nihilistic.
Yeah.
That's not what I'm saying at
No.
all.
No, no.
Yeah.
No.
I just wanted to ask that, I'm just thinking, why did nature create us this way? Or
Yeah, what a lovely question, yeah.
is this something that, is this all done by the society? Could we, as babies live in another world where we grow up with this non-duality sensation, or feeling, or whatever?
Well, the original question, why did nature create us this way? I think nature was having a really bad day, maybe woke up with a migraine, got very bad temper. It's like, the problem is, I mean, I've often said this, any question beginning with the word why can only be answered with a story. So why did nature create us this way? We can create many stories. And actually, it's quite obvious that a lot of the religions, probably most of the religions, are an attempt to answer that question from the perspective that that question makes sense. So the suggestion here is, yeah, if we ask any question asking, starting with the word why, then in a way, well, have whatever answer you like, because all of them will just be stories. I mean, obviously the mind thinks there's a hierarchy of answers in which one is right and all the others are wrong, but that's just the mind playing its usual kind of mind games. But in a way, well, I'm not putting the question down in any way, it's very natural to ask why questions, but in a way they don't make sense. I mean, they make sense to the mind because the mind can come up with a story to answer them, but when it's seen that all of those stories that the mind comes up with to answer them are essentially meaningless in the sense that they are just stories, then in a way the questions collapse.
Yeah, but we all tend to identify with this mind. I mean,
Not quite all of us,
okay.
but it's very common. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of the nub of the problem, because there was no identification with the mind. I guess that we wouldn't be asking these questions and it would all be seen through. But yeah, there is, but I want to add another thing here, and I've said this often before, maybe we'll come back to it tomorrow. I'm using the word mind, you're using the word mind, it's a natural thing to do. So it sounds like a very natural thing to say that we identify with the mind, and we just posited two things there that don't exist. You know, we don't exist, but the other thing is the mind doesn't exist. So what we think of as the mind, which sounds like it's an entity, it's a thing with its own solid existence, is actually just a word to describe a process of experience, which is, for most people, they would associate that word with the thinking experience. Some people would associate that word with the totality of the perceiving experience, including feelings and sensations and so forth. But there isn't really a mind. What there is this ever-changing. This is going to get a bit Buddhist now, I'm afraid. What there is this ever-changing phenomena. You know, I mean, we may, if you're familiar with these sorts of meetings and speakers and books and so forth, you know, you may very well, you know, come across before over and over again people writing and saying things like, all there is this, meaning that all there is whatever phenomena are happening. You know, what exists, well, whatever phenomena are happening, sounds, noticing a movement, seeing a colour, feelings, sensations of the temperature in the room. That's actually the whole of existence, is whatever is actually happening. But we tend to turn that into things that seem solid. I mean, even time seems solid in a strange way. You know, even though we know that past and future can't possibly exist, all that can exist is this. Nevertheless, even past and future somehow feels solid. So of course the mind feels kind of solid in a way. It's very easy to think in those terms, but it's kind of in a way equally easy to see how obviously this is not the case. You know, there isn't a mind. There's just this ever-changing circus of perceptions, experience, phenomena, whatever. What does reality consist of? Whatever's being perceived. It's come and gone so fast, you can't even give it a time frame. How long is this last? Does it last a second? A minute? Well, certainly not a minute. A second? I doubt it. Does it have any duration at all? We don't know. It doesn't, you know. You know, I mean, that phrase, all there is this, it's so commonly used in non-dual discourse. And in a way, it can be very, very challenging for the mind. All there is this. Really? All there is this. But in another way, excuse me, in another way, I'd say it's quite obvious. Isn't it, in a way, really obvious that this, whatever's arising right now, is all there is? Where is 5 minutes ago? Where's 5 seconds ago? Where is 1 second into the future? Nobody in this room has ever experienced 1 second of the future or 1 second in the past. I don't know quite how long a nanosecond is. I imagine it's quite a short period of time. Is there anyone in this room who can travel a nanosecond into the future or experience a nanosecond in the past? No. You can experience a memory, apparently, of the past. Where's this experience arising? Only in this. So, in a way, that kind of very central way of describing non-dual seeing, let's say, all there is this. It's kind of a challenge, but it's also very obvious. So I don't know whether that makes sense or not, but it makes sense to me, you know, that thing about, you know, this is the entirety of existence. In a way, it can be very challenging to the mind which doesn't exist, but in another way it is very obvious. I have a memory of having seen you here in May last year. Where can that memory arise? Only in this.
No, I was just thinking, of course you cannot prove anything about how the brain is working and all that, but do you think that this scene that the person just falls away, that it you could say yes or no, whatever you want, could come from the brain being different, so from another level of consciousness, from a development of the brain.
Yeah. Well, it seems to me there's two questions in
like
there.
when you meditate a lot and so something
maybe.
happens.
Well, maybe. Well, there are cases where I'm going to use this rather clumsy phrase, non-dual seeing. Just forgive me, but yeah, there are cases where people meditate and then there's non-dual seeing. There are cases where people don't meditate and then there's non-dual seeing. Yeah. Equally, there are cases where people meditate, no non-dual. So who knows? I wouldn't ascribe cause and effect. There's no need to. I mean, and in a way, in a kind of way, once it's seen that there isn't a person that makes choices about their life, it kind of takes the heat out of these questions. Should I practice Zen for the next 20 years or not? Well, that can seem like a pretty serious question when there's the sense that there's someone here who has a decision to make about that. When it's seen that what happens just happens, it takes the heat out. Well, maybe Zen will happen. Maybe Zen meditation will happen for the next 20 years. Maybe it won't. It has nothing to do with who I think I am. So I'm sure I am going to say this more than once over this weekend. It's a quote. I love it. People say, what's it like? Whatever. Impossible to answer. Cannot answer that question, but what I tend to say is, well, it's not like anything, but maybe it might be at least a little bit relaxing. And I came across this quote by an English Buddhist who wrote an introduction to a traditional ancient Dzogchen Buddhist work. And almost the last line of his introduction was, relaxation is the key to Buddhahood here and now. So, I mean, it's not an instruction to relax, and it doesn't mean anything any more or any less than anything else does. But what I will say, I mean, obviously relaxation, just like anything else, either happens or it doesn't. But if relaxation happens, then that's a blessing. And when it's seen that there isn't anyone making these life and death decisions, because they can seem like that, should I leave my wife and 15 children and go and spend the next 20 years in a Zen monastery? I know somebody who left his wife, only 4 children. He went and, he left his wife and 4 children and went off to India to become a sannyasin. That's a pretty heavy decision for the person to make. But when it's seen that there is no one who makes that decision, then maybe some relaxation can arise, and relaxation is the key to Buddhahood here and now.